the fact that in this very, very broad space, 61% of people said that this is where their symptoms were worst is very interesting.
Just knowing that that is a real fact is so powerful.
There was a lot of sense of like, well, your medication can't be affected by, hormones, so therefore it just must be in your imagination.
Yikes.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this very interesting episode of today's Research Recap. Today, we are going to be talking about something that we haven't dived into that much, but it's been a conversation that more and more people with ADHD that I've been speaking to have been having. And that is the relationship between hormones and ADHD. And specifically today, we're going to be talking about perimenopause because this is something that will define what it is a little bit. We'll talk about how it relates to ADHD, and then we'll also have a wonderful thematic analysis at the end talking about people's experiences of it. But it's something that, although neither Sarah or I are in that group, we hear a lot. We, empathize. We are on our way. And so it's good to have this, to understand what's happening in this area.
Yeah, it's really good to be talking about this because, as Skye said, we've been asked about it for, it feels like years. And now there's a couple of papers about it. So that's good.
Yeah, it's great. I know. I remember a few years ago, there was that beginning discussion, are hormones affecting my ADHD? Are hormones affecting my medication? Is this happening? And people are like, no, surely not. And now it's very, very much in the zeitgeist. Do you want to start by taking us through what perimenopause is, Sarah?
Perimenopause, simply put, is the period sort of in between. You still have the menstrual cycle in some form, but it's started to slow down. It's sort of on its way out. Aunt Flo is packing up. Now, this transition can last years. On average, they say like 3 to 5. But for some people, it can last for 10 years.
Aunt Flo takes ages to pack up.
Yeah, I mean, she's been with you for decades. Can you imagine packing up a house that you've lived in your whole life? Anyway,
that is true.
Doctors will typically start talking to you about this if you're in your 40s. It's less common for women to begin this change in their 30s, although it can happen. Things like endocrine function can impact this, hormones in general. Yeah, so perimenopause is the space between cycle and no cycle. And menopause is the 1-year birthday of your last period.
Wow, that's crazy. So what are some of the fun symptoms that we can see?
Well, it's obviously going to look a little bit different for everyone because hormones are involved. But the symptoms seem to be clustered in like 4 stages based on how much your estrogen has changed. Has it started to change? Are we fluctuating? Are we super low now? Where are we? We might start to notice things like just mood changes. You might even start to have heavier periods. It might be difficult to lose weight, loss of confidence. As those estrogen levels continue to fluctuate and progesterone sort of also fluctuates with the estrogen, you might start to have like chest tenderness, still with those heavy periods, you might still be gaining some weight, still with those mood symptoms.
Yeah, gosh.
And then you're going to start having the hot flashes and then like pains. That might be pain in your joints. It might be bone related. Lots of brain fog.
Yeah. But that's very interesting because one of the things that we've found anecdotally, and now we're looking at the research as well, is that one of the things I often say is you're always ADHD all the time. And that is the same for perimenopause as well. Like when you're going through this shift, you are still ADHD. And so your ADHD is still doing its thing. And in some cases, it seems like it's being affected as well, along with the rest of your body, which makes sense. It feels in some ways, as we're having this conversation, I'm like, well, of course. But it wasn't something that we thought about at the time. There was a lot of sense of like, well, your medication can't be affected by, hormones. So therefore it just must be in your imagination.
Yikes.
So the first paper that we're going to cover today is pretty simply called Perimenopause, Menopause, and ADHD. It's from the Journal of the International Neuropsychological Society, and it's a very short paper, and Sarah will explain why in a minute. But essentially what they wanted to do was they wanted to report on some survey findings that they got from Attitude magazine, so shout out to them, on the impact of hormonal changes due to menopause on the ADHD symptoms, which is interesting and very, I wouldn't say rare, but like it's really good to find this paper. We were really excited to find it. So Sarah, do you want to take me through how they got this data?
They pulled this data actually from a larger study on women with ADHD in relation to their hormones. They specifically wanted to look at women 46 and older because they're the ones who are most likely to be perimenopausal. Mm-hmm. And they came away with like 2,600 women. So that's amazing.
Yeah.
85% of them were diagnosed with ADHD. So again, that's really on target.
Yeah.
Before we get into results, I just want to flag that they also asked what age these people were diagnosed. And then they also asked about different symptom complaints in like their different age groups. They're looking at like 0 to 9 years, 10 to 19, 20 to 39, 40 to 59, and then 60 plus. That's going to be important later, but I'll probably repeat myself.
Just in case we forget, working memory.
So the results, 61% said that their symptoms, their ADHD symptoms, were the worst during their 40 to 59 year age bracket.
Which is a lot.
So during the perimenopausal stage, more than half women said that was the worst sort of period for their ADHD.
And just to be clear, this is like a group of people. This is over 2,600 people. And they were looking at different age groups that went all the way from 0 to 60 plus. That's kind of what they were looking at. So the fact that in this very, very broad space, 61% of people said that between a 20-year gap, this is where their symptoms were worst, is very interesting.
It's really sad.
But there is a positive.
There's a lot of mothers of teenagers there.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the positive, I'll get straight to the positive, okay? Only 3% said that same thing in the 60 plus group. So, once you get to be like senior age, you're 60 years old, more than likely 97% chance, according to this study, you're going to be feeling like the worst is behind you.
And obviously this is not a causational study. This is just one correlational study, but it was really interesting, particularly like you said about this idea, because I think a lot of people have this idea that, well, if the symptoms are worst during this period, there's this inevitable decline. We're just on our way down. And that doesn't seem to be the case based on this one study.
That's such a good point.
But there was something interesting about this study. Sarah, do you want to take us through what that was?
As I mentioned, this data was pulled from other data, but rather than write up a new paper about it, they sort of just created a new abstract and then submitted that. And then they talked about it at their international conference. And I just have never seen that before.
No, we've never come across that.
Skye was like, is this it?
And it was. So, thank you very much for giving us. I mean, maybe that happens at different papers. We've never seen it before. So we did just want to flag that. If you go looking for the paper, it's very short.
And you can get that information. You can sort of breadcrumb back to the original study as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting way of doing it, but still really nice to get a sense of what the potential differences might be.
And there's people talking about it, right? Like they had a whole conference and they talked about it.
Yes.
Love that.
I think there's a lot of people. Honestly, I think, one of the things I have noticed, and I completely understand why, is that if you are a woman in this age and you are now in a space where you feel comfortable talking about ADHD and talking about menopause, both two things we didn't really like talking about until recently, you want to talk about this because it is affecting your life a lot, potentially. And so if it is, it's a huge factor in people's lives. They're going to the doctor, they're trying to figure it out. So that kind of leads us into our next paper. Hey, you listening to this podcast. If you like what we do and you want to hear more of it, there is one way to make sure that happens. Please go ahead, subscribe, and leave a 5-star review. We have been told 5-star reviews can help us to get seen by more people, which means more people are going to learn about ADHD strategies.
Just press the button. Just give us a 5-star review.
That kind of leads us into our next paper, which is a thematic analysis, which we love because it gives us such a great sort of sense of what is happening in the actual lives of these people. And it was looking at a female-specific treatment group. And by this, they mean, they met with them and spoke with them for ADHD. And they were looking at hormone fluctuations. So perimenopause is included in here, but it wasn't the only thing that they were talking about. Sarah, do you want to take us through how they did this study?
Yeah. So as Skye mentioned, this is focused around like a group program for women with ADHD, and it was really meant to educate them on their hormonal cycle and its impact on ADHD. The thematic analysis is just like extra special that they decided to share that with us. But basically, we're looking at 18 women, 25 to 47 years old. The mean age here was like 38. So again, a little young to be looking totally at perimenopause, but basically they had them record information about their cycle through an app. They sort of had these fortnightly sessions. That means every other week sessions, 2 hours each. They had a break at some point in the program so that the people could implement what they discussed. Yeah, they were meant to track specifically their menstrual cycle, their ADHD symptoms, their mood symptoms, and somatic symptoms. So that means like physical stuff, probably like sleep disturbances and things like that.
Yeah. They were clinically diagnosed using the Diva. So she's back. We've talked about her recently. And they were also excluding a lot of mental health stuff. So severe depression, anxiety or panic disorder, other things. They just said hindering group treatment, anything that they felt would get in the way of being able to do this. And this is all translated from Dutch to English as well.
It even talks about how when a translation couldn't be easily found, they had little like meetings about it to make sure that they all agreed on the translation. And I just think that's so lovely.
Qualitative research at its best. Yeah. So what were some of the quotes from the woman, Sarah?
They were really looking at learning this information for the first time, I think. I mean, they coded it as eye openers. So things from learning how this would have affected them in childhood and learning about how it impacts, like how the hormones impact the emotions. It says, after giving birth, I did not know how connected this was with ADHD, but again, it explains a lot. Why was I such a terrible adolescent? What was happening in my head?
Yeah.
I mean, is that my quote? Was I reading that from the paper? I don't know. No.
Yeah, it is interesting. I mean, I think, gosh, finding out that you have ADHD during the menopausal cycle as well feels like a lot. They did mention this is premenstrual. Their symptoms were similar but not identical. So people talked about, struggling to get started on things, feeling under the weather, feeling unwell. I think a lot of people benefited just from the fact that they were in a room full of other women who were acknowledging that this was something that they were doing and it was affecting their ADHD.
Definitely. One of the other main themes was empathy. It says just having some clarity for myself allows me to be more clear with others.
Yeah, it's very true. And I think it was interesting because they also talked about this idea that it meant that they were maybe going to take themselves and their menstrual cycles a little bit more seriously as well. And I think that's something that, we've talked about. We've actually cut some of that from this podcast, this idea, and we might talk about it because we want to have a more like considered conversation about this in the future, but this idea of what is something that you should take seriously and what is something that you should push through. And that's always going to be a conversation, I think, especially when you're a woman, because there are lots of hormonal changes and that does affect you or most people. And there's also ADHD, and that appears to, according to some of the research at least, be affected by hormonal changes. So there's a lot going on. Yeah, it definitely has a big effect, and that's why we wanted to talk about that today.
Yeah, I mean, just knowing that that is a real fact is so powerful.
Yeah.
They start to end their paper by saying that a treatment for women with ADHD and hormone sort of concerns is so needed. They cite 7 papers for that one sentence. And I was just like, yes, agree.
I know. You've got starts clapping furiously in your notes.
Yeah. Support group is one possibility. They also cite medication adjustments as another possibility. Therapy is always probably part of the picture when you're navigating such a meaningful life transition. Yeah. I mean, we're really just trying to add as much to this toolbox as possible and not replace anything.
Exactly. And hopefully this has been helpful. I mean, even if you are not experiencing this or may never experience this, it gives you a sense of what other people are going through. I mean, I definitely feel like by doing the research for this episode, I learned so much. And I feel like I have a much better sense of something that honestly, outside of wanting to learn this stuff, probably just would have taken me by surprise. Like so many things in life. You're like, oh, and this too. Great. That's cool. That's cool.
It's really interesting. I'm going to share this story super quickly. In the academy recently, we were sharing as a group about the seasonal changes and what we know that means for us. And one of the men in the group was like, what is this research about seasonal changes? And I guess I never really thought about cycles like this. And I just had to think about it and digest it for a day. And then I realized that as women, we're more often needing to pay attention to the cycles of things and the changes of things. And if we can plan one time, then we can ideally be planned for all those other times. And how that's not necessarily built into the male experience.
Yeah. But it's interesting as well because, I mean, the seasonal changes in terms of the weather, that affects us all. I think understanding that kind of the cyclical way we work with ADHD. I mean, summer, winter, Christmas, all of those things, they all have effects on us, the beginning of the semester, the end of the semester, the beginning of the week, the end of the week.
Yeah.
There's all these kinds of things. And obviously we're talking about, menopause, we're talking about hormones. It's very, very different. But it's nice to learn from other people, learn what might be coming your way in the next season of life and have a bit of a sense of it. Or if you're in that season, definitely reach out to us. Let us know if this has been your experience, if you have anything you want to add as well.
And if you're a treatment provider for women with ADHD and perimenopause, please contact us because we would love to talk to you.
You can contact us on any channel. We will speak to you immediately.
I'll drop my cell below. No.
Yeah. Pretty much. Yeah, but that's everything. Yeah, I hope that was helpful. I hope you guys learned something. That's what we really want to do. Let us know what you want us to talk about next. We're always interested in what we should look into and research some more. And we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you for listening, everyone. And a big thank you to Adam for making us sound great and Anastasia for making us look great. We couldn't do it without you.
And if you're looking for any of the references to the papers that we discuss, head on over to our show notes page because I always bring the receipts.
Plus, if you want to find out more about us or any more deep diving into what we're doing, you can find us on Substack. That's where the community is. That's where we're chatting, and you can see all of the fun and exciting things that we are bringing to the table.
Thanks for being here.